Look, if you really want your career to take off and do something, if you really want to do something interesting, you're going to have conversations.
Yes.
I mean, you are like, you're not going to be able to do it all through email. You're not going to be able to do it all through text. You're going to have actual conversations. You're going to have to become really great at having conversations. If there's one thing I think you've learned in the last year that I've seen anyway, it's how to handle yourself in a conversation, as difficult as it might be.
Hello, and welcome to Crushing Classical, redefining a thriving classical music career. On today's Fireside Chat, we talked about several things, starting something and what that means as a self-employed musician creating a career. I used myself as an example and talked about the book I'm writing, which I started last year and is still in the works. We discussed what it takes to start and what happens when you screw up. That led to a discussion about conversation and how actually talking to people is integral in getting what you want in life. I shared a funny story from my life about a recent miscommunication. Actually, it was really a lack of communication that happened recently and how it got resolved. It was a very enlightening experience, I'll tell you that much. This was a great conversation, so let's get started. Hey, Eileen, how are you?
Hey, good. How are you?
Great, thanks. So I wanted to start today by talking about the article you texted me because it's a great article, and it's about an entrepreneur who's writing a book. The article was written about his book writing process and what that was like, and all the pitfalls. Essentially, it was an article to share his process for people who are writing a book, and so that they can see his mistakes. And I think his hope in the article was so that you could be more informed and educated and aware and know, what's in store for you if you want to do a project like that. I think that
Well,
was kind of...
yeah, I think so. And I think, I think it's really timely because a lot of people seem to want to write books these days. And also, I think that self-publishing has become more attainable.
Yes. And there's been several musicians who have written books recently that I know. And I set out to write a book last summer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why you forwarded me the article. And it was fascinating because on one hand, I understood some of the stuff he was saying because of my experience thus far. I don't have a finished book yet. And on the other hand, there was a whole slew of things that I hadn't even considered. So it was really a valuable article. In fact, I'm not even done with it because it was really long. And one of the things I wanted to touch on was just the fact that, okay, so I decided to write a book and started the writing process, realizing that, wow, I haven't written anything since high school, since book reports, or college, since,
Yeah.
some kind of report.
And that's pretty normal, I think, for most people. They haven't written since school.
Yeah. So all my writing, and you were helping me a lot, all of my writing sounded like a report.
It did.
It sounded very formal. I was using words I never say in conversation.
Right.
And you would read it and go, okay, this doesn't sound like you're talking to me. This doesn't sound conversational. And that's what you want a book. When you're reading a book, you want it to sound like someone's talking to you. You want to feel connected.
You want it to sound like someone, like I always say, you want somebody, to sound like someone sitting across from you in a coffee shop and having a conversation with you.
Exactly. And so I struggled with that for a long time, and I practiced and worked on it, and you helped me edit a little bit. And then at a certain point you said, I really think you need an editor, maybe a combination book coaching or author writing coaching editor type of person. And so I started searching for that, and I found somebody and hired him, and it was very expensive. And I was essentially putting my butt on the line for, something I had no idea what I was going into. I didn't know how much money the book could make, if I could pay back the amount of money I paid to him. And there was just so much pressure that I put on myself for that. And so reading this article, I have a project that's not even remotely completed. And it's still something I intend on doing and I will finish. But I want it to be really awesome. I want to put out something that I know I will be really proud of, that'll stand out and everything. So I don't want to just put something together just so I can say I've completed a book. But reading this article, it just shined a light on a lot of issues when you decide to take on a new project. And I think this is what this podcast is about, is branching out and creating your own career and creating things that don't exist yet for yourself. And this is an example of that. Like, nothing is set up in place. So we've been talking about that a little bit this morning. Nothing is set up for you. Nothing, you don't just show up and it's done like you would if you were showing up for an orchestra job or any other job for that matter. When you're creating something on your own, you have to create everything that it's made up of.
Mhm.
And so that's a challenge. That's the challenge, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, when you're starting, and I think this is good for anyone who's, thinking about creating a career in classical music or outside of classical music, if you want to do something, if you want to record, if you, whatever it is you want to do, um, there's a lot of unknowns and you can research all day long. And I think a lot of people get caught up in the research phase
Mhm.
where, and actually, I think you were going to do that too. When you were first starting a podcast, you were like, I'm going to take, 3 or 4 months. I don't know. I'm characterizing it. I don't know if it was 3 or 4 months, but I'm going to take, 3 to 4 months to learn about podcasts before I do a podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I was like, I have to learn how to do this first. I can't say I'm going to do. I was very uncomfortable about emailing my first 5 guests and saying, I have a podcast coming out,
Yep.
when I had just only discussed with you the day before, I'm going to do a podcast. And you said, okay, when? And I said, huh, I don't know. So then I sent an email saying that I'm doing a podcast. That doesn't feel right naturally to me because I'm not doing a podcast yet. So
Right.
that's why it felt so weird.
So, and I think the key here is you have to make the first move. Like, I think people spend too much time trying to figure out how to do it instead of just doing it and screwing up along the way. And
Mhm.
that's what you actually have to get comfortable with if you want to create a career. You have to actually get comfortable with that you don't know what you're doing. You're going to take a step, and a lot of the steps are going to be right, but some of the steps are going to be wrong. And it's not a make or break thing. It's just, oh, that was a goof. Not going to do that again or going to do that differently or whatever. Like, you have to, a lot of it is how you're wired to react to these things. Like, a lot of it, I think a lot of I'm speaking to you, Tracy, a lot of your maturity has come from that you're no longer, and I might be speaking for you, but I don't think you have so much of an adverse reaction anymore to problems. Like, yes, you have an adverse reaction to it, but it's not nearly as it doesn't have as much charge anymore.
I agree. I've had enough face plants
Yep.
that I've gone, okay, so it happened. So what?
Yep.
You know?
Yep. And I mean, what I always say to people is, well, you didn't die. So, you know, like, if you didn't die, it's fine.
Yeah,
You know, sometimes
exactly.
sometimes I read about these guys. You've heard about these guys that do the deep sea divers. You've heard about these guys? Have you read
Yeah.
about them at all? These guys who they put on wetsuits and they dive all the way down to, 300, 400 feet underneath the ocean. And then they come back.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that guy could die,
Yeah.
for real. Like, he could die if he breathes in when, because they hold their breath. They don't go down with the tank. They're holding their breath when they go
Oh,
down.
that's what you're talking about.
You know what I'm talking about, right? I forgot what they call
No,
those guys. Oh, you don't
they
know
don't
about
go
this?
down with the tank. No, they hold their breath.
No, they hold their breath. Yeah, these are like Olympic divers. I say Olympic, I just mean Olympic as in that's their level of training. And they literally they take a breath at the top of the water and they dive all the way down and they hold their breath all the way down to the bottom.
That's scary.
I know, right? And by the way, by the time they get down to the bottom, their lungs are about a quarter of the size of regular lungs.
Oh my God.
I'm not joking. I'll send you some articles. It's really interesting. Now I read about these things because it reminds me a lot. I mean, seriously, it's a little bit, you know, probably a little bit stupid, but I read about these things because it reminds me how much more difficult someone else has it than I do.
Right. Yeah.
Right? This guy,
Yeah.
like he could die. Like he could take a practice dive, and if he doesn't have his mind right and he accidentally breathes in down there, he's a goner. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, the people have died. Like they've gone down there. They've done this diving, and like what'll happen sometimes is when they turn around to come back up, they go unconscious.
Oh my God.
And so if that happens, and they're not close enough to the surface, they could end up breathing in water and then filling their lungs, and then they're dead. That's it.
So why don't they bring a tank?
Because the sport literally is,
Okay.
you hold your breath and you go down. I think the guy, I just read about this guy the other day. He's the number one diver. He's like in his 30s. He's like 35 or something, 32, and he lives in the Bahamas, I believe. And he does this daily. He goes and he trains daily, but a lot of his training is meditation
Mm-hmm.
because he's got to get his mind right. But a lot of it is also breath training. So the whole deal though really is that you hold your breath and you go all the way down. You come back up. I think the furthest he's gone down is 345 feet.
And he can hold his breath for how long?
Um, maybe 7 or 8 minutes.
Okay.
Some ridiculous number.
Remember David Blaine, that magician? He did that
Yeah,
thing where
yeah, yeah,
I think he held his breath for like 10 minutes or
yeah,
something.
yeah. David Blaine, he's a freak of nature too. So,
Yeah.
and look, I mean, we could maybe say that David does it with some magic in there, like he does it with illusions. Although, like this guy, there's no illusion. So I don't know if David Blaine does that with illusions. I'm not really sure. But my point is like that. When you think about somebody like this guy, and again, I can't remember his name right off the bat, but when he does these dives, like when he takes a risk, the truth is that he could die
Mm-hmm.
every single day. There's the opportunity for him to die. We don't have that problem.
Exactly.
We really don't. And so that these are things that I read. I read about people like this on a regular basis. I mean, like every week, I'm looking for new things to read about people who are doing amazing things. Why? Because the more I read, the more it gives me hope, and it reminds me that I really don't have it that badly. I mean, like I'm not taking a survival risk over here.
And this speaks to the post I did a couple days ago about what you spend your time on
Hmm.
when you're not
Yeah.
working, when you're not
Yeah.
practicing, or,
Yes.
you know,
Hmm.
um, you're educating yourself about things that will change your mindset about your
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah.
And I do the same thing. I'm always looking to educate myself. And um, I just don't want to waste my time on things like Sudoku or crosswords or,
Right. I never. Well, and I think there are some people who have a penchant for that repetitive type of deal, because that's what games are. It's a repetitive motion, a repetitive pattern. It's patterns. That's what games are.
right.
I'm not interested in patterns. I'm interested in learning.
Me too.
And I think that if there's one thing, one takeaway you could get, as a listener, it's get interested in learning instead of being interested in patterns. Because playing a video game, reinforcing a pattern, that's not actually going to help you in your life. I hate to say it, but it's not. You playing Tetris, or you playing, you know, Angry
Candy
Birds,
Crush.
yeah, whatever people are playing these days. I don't even know. Like I'm quoting games that people don't even play anymore.
I know, because you don't know what they
'Cause
are.
I don't know what they are, right?
I know. Yeah.
So completely.
No, I know. And it's funny because it took me getting out of school to get hungry for learning. And I think it was because I felt like when I was in school that people were always telling me what I needed to learn so that I'd have to take a test on it and prove that I learned it. And I liked when I got out of school, I liked the model of learn whatever you want because
Yeah.
it's for you. It's for your own self-improvement. And that's when I got really hungry to learn about, health and keeping yourself healthy. And,
Hmm.
you know, right now I have that Marie Kondo Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up book right in front of me, sitting in a pile here, among other things.
Oh, really?
Um, yeah, just because I love to learn more concepts about what other people are thinking. I love the idea of finding articles like what you just said about the diver, going, this is going to put my fails in perspective. Like, so I didn't finish a book yet. I didn't accidentally breathe under the ocean at 300 feet,
Hmm.
you know? And so that's a really great perspective because I think a lot of times people don't make moves and they don't take a chance because they're afraid of failure. And
I think you're right.
uh,
Well, and
yeah,
I'll tell you, there's a couple of resources since, we're talking about this. This whole idea of expanding, because look, if you're going to create something, you have to get used to a few ideas. One of them is that you're not going to know everything starting out. You're going to mess up, and you have to get over that you're going to mess up because you will. And I think, Tracy, you can speak to this the most. Like, I don't think that you expected the amount of, I'll just call them screw ups. I don't think you expected the amount of screw ups that you've had.
no, because I was all, sunshine and rainbows about it. I'll just figure this out and everything will be fine. And you don't know what you don't know. So you don't know how something's going to screw up if you don't know that's a possible scenario of screwing up,
Yeah, that's the whole thing. Is a lot of and you can try and prepare as much as you can. But I'm going to tell you, like the best the best case of learning for you is just going into it and learning along the way. Are there some things you want to know up front? Yes. But you can't know everything up front before you start. It's not possible.
Yeah, and it's funny. This made me think of how every time I've had an audition, I've screwed something up or concert. In the actual performance, I always screw up something that I never screwed up before in my practice session. It's kind of common actually.
Really.
Like, you'll nail the thing that you think you'd screw up and something else surprises you and you screw it up. It's just it's a little bit like that. Like you don't know that could possibly happen. It did.
Right.
So what?
Yeah. And I mean, and listen, it's going to be more impactful. Look, I realize that if you're playing an exposed part and you're playing a symphony and everybody can hear you and you play a wrong note, that's that sucks. But I'm going to tell you, that's a moment in time that people forget about.
Right.
The kind of stuff that you're going to screw up when you're trying to create a career is stuff that could be lasting. Um, and I don't say lasting like it's never going to go away, but like I have taken I've taken on clients before and ended up either they fired me or I fired them, and there was fallout from that. Either they had to give me money back, I had to give them money back, like, and maybe that took some time to get that paid back. Does that make sense? So,
Yeah.
like, that's just an example. There's a lot of different examples I could give you, but that's just an example of sometimes when there's fallout, I mean, you have to deal with it. And whereas if you play a wrong note in a symphony, it was one moment in time and it's over. This is a very different thing.
Exactly. You're
This is
right.
a very, very different thing. This is not that. This is, even though I understand that, it's embarrassing to play a wrong note, that was one moment in time and it was over. Like it was over before it started,
Yeah.
you know, and you never have to think about it again and you can go home.
Yeah.
When there's screw ups, when you're creating something, sometimes they take you actually become good at working out all of the problems that happen as a result of the things you screw up.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you a good example, and it's from my book writing. I wrote a whole first draft, and going back and reading it after he's been editing it, mind you, I go back and read it. I'm like, this is boring as fuck.
Oh yeah.
You remember?
Yeah.
I'm reading it and I'm like, I don't want to read this book. I hate it. you know? And I called you and I was like, look, this is a problem. I feel like overall the feeling of this book is this or that, the other. And you and I talked about it and reframed it, and I felt fired up about it again. And I kind of scrapped almost everything and started over. And I let my editor know that was happening. And then he got pissed off at me. You
Yeah,
remember this?
I do. Yep.
And he's like, listen, you know, we have an agreement to work together for 4 months, which, by the way, the fact that I thought I could write a book in 4 months is insane. Now that I'm looking back on it and reading this article, the guy was like, it took me, after he'd already written several drafts and got rejected from the the publisher before he decided to
Yep.
self-publish. So he had done an enormous amount of work for 3 years before he decided to self-publish. Then he regrouped and decided to republish, and he outlines how he did it. Then on top of that, it still took 11 months. So it was very unrealistic for me to think that I could knock out a book in 4 months.
And yet, I've heard about people doing that. I've heard about people, dedicating themselves to. That's all they're doing is writing a book.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard that. I mean, I know people who've written books in 3, 4, 5 months time. Hell, I know people who've written books in 60 days.
True, right? Because that one author that you and I talk about all the time in the business world,
Mm-hmm.
he sat down and wrote it in 3 days, and it's great. It's a great book.
Yeah,
But he had a super, super duper clear vision of what he wanted, and I don't know. I had an idea of what I want. Also, that wasn't his first book, I don't think. I'm not sure. Maybe it was. But
I don't think it was. I think he's written others.
right. And so this was going in my first book. I have an idea of what I want it to be, but working through the ideas and how they're going to sound coming out,
Mm-hmm.
and how to make the book impactful and how to make it interesting to read and conversational, all these other things. Um, you know,
Mm-hmm.
my first go at it wasn't what I wanted, and then having to answer to this person, and
Right.
him going, I'm included in this project too, and
Right.
you discussed it with your friend, and now here I am not knowing, I'm being out, not in the loop, and
Right.
then we're starting over, and you should have certain word count and da da da. But it was hard. It was really hard. It was like a lot of confrontation that I didn't like.
Yeah, and there was a lot of pressure too because of the
A lot of pressure.
timeline.
Yes, pressure from the timeline, confrontation because I had to deal with a person who was mad at me, and um but at the same time stand my ground, because I'm like, I'm not going to put out a book that I think is boring.
100%. I mean, I was glad that you stood your ground, and yet I understood why he got upset because he felt cut out. I understand that. And I actually, that was partly my mistake too, because I actually thought you spoke with him. Like, I thought you were letting him know that we were talking about it. I didn't know. I mean, I figured you were just letting him know we were at least speaking about it. I didn't know.
I let him know. I kind of let him know, but it was in an email. So you know how that is. It's like a few sentences, and
Yeah.
the thing is, he responded with, "Oh, that's cool." And then he
Right.
got on the phone with me and it was not cool.
Right, exactly.
So,
So he pretended like it was fine, and then he got on the phone, and that's going to
yeah.
happen. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things you've learned, Tracy, is the whole thing about it's really I'm going to say confrontation because it's really the only word to use for it, where you're going to have problems with human beings. And because human beings are involved in everything we do, you're going to have problems with human beings, and there's going to be disagreements, and there's going to be different points of view, and you're going to have to deal with all that.
Yep.
And I know that that was new for you.
Yeah, and you know what? In this day and age, we don't talk a
Nope.
lot.
Hell,
We
we break
text.
up with people on text now.
Yeah.
Like, what do they? Do you know what they call that? I've read about this, by the way. And I'm not in the dating world at all. Um, and I'm single, but I'm also not in the dating world. But I've heard this term called ghosting. You heard
What's
about
that?
ghosting? Is where you're in touch with somebody. I may say this wrong. Any millennials probably going to laugh at me right now. But what I understand it is you're in touch with somebody. Maybe you met them on a dating app, maybe you met them in a bar or a restaurant, whatever. You got introduced by friends. You guys are in touch on text, and that's how people stay in touch nowadays. But then one person completely disappears and doesn't respond ever again. That's called ghosting. Like
Oh,
they literally become a ghost. You never see them again. Like they're gone, poof, gone. Ghosting. That's what it's called. There's an actual word for it now.
there's an actual word for it
It's a
now.
verb. Ghosting. Oh wait, no, is that a noun?
I said
Ghost.
word.
To ghost is a verb, and then ghosting is, I think it's a
It's a
noun.
name. Yeah, yeah.
Hmm. Yeah,
Oh,
ghosting.
wow.
Yeah, it's a real thing. And so that's part of what you're used to, though. Is like, I know that you're in your 40s and all that, but you're used to, when you and I were younger, if you wanted to break up with a boy that you were, hanging out with, or going to dinner with, or going to prom with, or whatever, you had to call that kid
Yeah.
because you were going to see him at school.
I've only ever broken up with somebody on the phone.
Okay, right. So,
Yeah.
but what I'm saying is,
Like in a call.
you'd have to talk with them. You either have to call them or you have to see
Yeah.
them. One of the two.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
was no. Now, of course, there is email, and so people have done it that way. But since text came along, that's people are doing everything by text and email. Like no one is having, no one's working anything out verbally.
Yep.
And so what it's created though, and this is part of the whole creating a career thing, like, look, if you really want your career to take off and do something, if you really want to do something interesting, you're going to have conversations.
Yes.
I mean, you are like, you're not going to be able to do it all through email. You're not going to be able to do it all through text. You're going to have actual conversations. You're going to have to become really great at having conversations. If there's one thing I think you've learned in the last year that I've seen anyway, it's how to handle yourself in a conversation, as difficult as it might be.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Well, one of the things that really fired me up was that I really love having these conversations on the podcasts, like
Yeah.
um asking people questions and just listening to what they're saying. That's fun. I get nervous every time, because starting a conversation is always awkward.
Yeah, it is. You're right. I agree.
You're like, okay, we're starting. Like, because before every episode, I say to the person, okay, we're starting, ready, go. Like, that's weird, and then and then you start out because you'd been talking a second ago,
Sure.
you know, when they get connected on the call and then you start and it's like, it's always that first few minutes, that icebreaker time.
Mhm.
But like over the last year, I've, because of what I know now, sure, certainly I still feel like I'd rather text or email somebody because it's just easier. But what I know is that when I call somebody and talk to them, say I'm talking to them about crushing classical, about getting their students to um, be introduced to the podcast or something, it's so much more engaging,
Mhm.
interesting when I have a conversation on the phone. And then recently we were renovating, still kind of finishing up the project, and we had a situation with our neighbor,
Oh
and
yeah,
I
you
won't
know
go
what?
into.
I'm really glad you brought that up because I was gonna say something about that actually.
Really?
I was wondering if you wanted to talk about that because it's such a good example of you turning something that was really negative into something very positive just with one conversation.
Yeah, and I believe me,
But
it wasn't natural. I
well,
called.
you gotta tell the story though because the story was great. Like it was the thing with the dog, right?
Yeah, I'll tell you. I'll tell the story. So and there's a neighbor who lives just to the right of our house. He owns three houses that are rental properties, so he's never there. So
And
um,
are they on the same street?
they're all on the same street.
Okay.
The three that are to the east of our house in a row are his rental properties.
Okay.
And so I um never really see him. And so last year at some point, we got some mulch delivered to spread around in our front yard, and David had it delivered, and the people dumped it, on the easement between the sidewalk and the street, which technically isn't anybody's yard, but people kind of consider the part that's in front of their house their yard too, and they can plant trees and gardens or whatever they want in there. And so the delivery was put on, and it sort of went a little bit on our side and his side, and he was there doing some maintenance. And he said, "Hey," to my husband, "Hey, there's this mulch is on my property." And David,
Yeah, you got to say what he said because it's funny as hell. You got to say it. What did he say again? Because I can't
he
remember.
said something like, "Oh, I'll move it so your weeds can grow," or something like that.
So I think a little background here is that you guys don't think that he takes real good care of the properties.
No, not at all. I mean, he can't even rent one of them right now because it's so dilapidated. Like you can, if you look at the roof, it looks like it's going to collapse. It
Oh,
really does. Yeah, there's a dormer in the very middle of the roof. They're small houses, and it's sinking in the middle. Like
ooh.
I don't
Yeah,
even know
I
how.
wonder why nobody wants to rent there.
Yeah, there's still a for
Right.
rent sign. People have looked at it. I think they've gone, I'm not going into this mess. And I don't even know how he has it insured because when we had a leaky roof, I got an insurance letter from my insurance company. It was right before we renovated. And they somehow they must send people out to look.
I was
And
gonna say that must be like a spot check thing because I don't know how they'd know otherwise.
right, I got this letter. I'm like, what are you how do you know? You're spying on me. This is creepy.
Right.
But, I took care of it because we were just about to start our renovation. Obviously, I don't want a leaky roof, but it was like that for a little bit. So then the guy, so he would, David, they got in a little nasty kind of match there, just a little rude to each other.
Right. So David says this, offhand kind of rude comment. Well, I'll move my mulch, off your property so that your weeds can grow better, right?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
whatever, something like that, right?
Yeah.
So did they keep their little tit for tat going a little bit?
Just for a couple minutes, and I overheard, or I saw them talking, and they looked unhappy, and I'm like, what the hell's going on out here? And he's like, that guy's a jerk, he's all pissed that the mulch is there and it's only been there for a day, and blah blah blah. I told him his weeds can grow, I'll move it. And I'm just like, oh great, whatever. But then then he goes away, and he doesn't maintain his property, so he's never really there. And I never see him. So then a year, like almost a year goes by, or more, I don't know. And and one day I'm out in the backyard with Violet and the dog.
This is like a couple months ago, right?
Yeah, a few months ago.
Yeah.
And then we come in, and I noticed there's something going on outside, so I went outside. Or no, then Violet wanted to go in the front yard, and I left the dog in the house. And I came outside, and there's the dog catcher, like the county, animal controls out there. And they only come around if somebody calls. And so this officer comes up to me, and she goes, what does she say? She's like, is this your house? And I'm like, yeah. And she goes, I've been pounding on the door for 10 minutes. I'm like, okay, why? I was outside, She goes, we got a report that there was a dog outside that was loose. And I'm like, my dog's in my house, and she's like grilling me. Like she knew that it was me. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. And so then she goes away, and then I see him, and he's talking to the animal control people. And I'm like, what is going on here? And then I remembered that after the little fight that David had with this neighbor, he said, oh, if I ever see your dog off the leash again, I'm going to call animal control. Because sometimes Bernie's he's an old dog, and he doesn't run off. And sometimes he hangs out in the front with us, and he's not on the leash. And technically that's wrong, but nothing happens.
Right.
So when he was in the house. So it turns out that's what happened. But he saw another dog that was off the leash. The neighbor across the street left her dog in her backyard and left the house, and then the dog was off the leash. And the dogs are similar breeds, although not the same at all, not the same color or anything. But the guy never comes around, so he forgot.
So he doesn't know what dog's what, he doesn't.
Yeah, so he doesn't know because he doesn't live there. He doesn't know what color he is or whatever. Their dog is brown, our dog is black. And he called in on her. By mistake, though, he was trying to call us.
Us, yeah.
On us. So then I find out all this after, took a while to kind of unravel the story. Mm-hmm. And I was pissed. I was like, dude, now I have a situation I didn't even know I had where I have animosity with a neighbor who doesn't even live here and all this other stuff. So So I called you, actually. I was like, oh my God, can you believe this story? I'm so irritated
Well,
by it.
yeah, and I remember when you contacted me about it because you said something happened with animal control, and of course I panicked because I thought, oh my God, did they take the dog?
Yeah.
What happened? I mean, because if animal control gets a hold of your dog, I'm sorry, but can never turn out well. I don't know how that could possibly turn out well.
I know, it's bad.
If
It's
they get a hold of your dog, like there's obviously something went wrong, or somebody got attacked, or it's usually some terrible thing, and now you have to substantiate getting your dog back. I think that's the biggest problem with animal control.
I know. I know.
It's not like somebody finding your dog and holding them for you in their house. It's with animal control. You have to like prove that you can get the dog back for whatever the reason is.
I know. And actually it brought up a good conversation for the neighborhood, and I need to continue it because, we should be, as neighbors, it would be nice if we took care of each other's, if something were to sometimes mistakes happen and the dog gets out of the fence, and instead of calling animal control on our neighbors, maybe we can help each other out.
Yeah, maybe we can not call animal control and just be good neighbors.
Exactly.
Because mistakes do happen. But yeah, no, I mean, I remember you contacted me, and I was really in a hurry to get on the call with you because I was worried that Bernie got taken away.
Yeah.
And then of course you got on a call with me and told me what happened, and I was like, well, you know what you have to do, and you were upset too.
I was.
You were having a terrible day already, but then that happened.
Yeah.
That's what I remember, is that there were several things that had gone wrong that day, and then there was that.
Yeah, exactly.
That was like the cherry on top of everything that
It was. It was. And I'm like, oh, another thing I have to deal with. Someone who hates my guts and
Right.
is out to get me and wants to make my dog suffer for it,
Right. And at the time, and again, why are we talking about this? It speaks to you're going to have situations like that. Like, look, it could be a dog catcher, it could be I don't care what it is, but you're going to have situations with human beings that you didn't want, like you didn't invite, and it happened. It happens.
Yeah.
And now you have to deal with it. And this is going to happen to you in everything you do. It's going to happen in your career. It's going to happen in your personal life. It's going to happen everywhere. And you can't avoid it because every day you have to deal with human beings. Every day.
Yes. Yes. And so what happened was you told me what I knew you would say, and I didn't want to hear it, but you said you're going to have to call him.
Did you know I was going to say that?
I sort of had an inkling that you would say that.
Okay.
Which is why I guess I think my top of mind idea was I can call Eileen. She's going to know how bad I feel right now, and it's going to feel better to talk to a friend. Mm-hmm. And then like deeper down, I knew that you would have a solution. Yeah. And deeper down than that, I knew it would probably be something I didn't want to
do. There's like 3 layers of talking to Eileen.
Yeah.
There's the friend layer, she's gonna have a solution layer, and there's gonna be a solution I don't like layer.
Because one thing I can always count on you is that when something is really going wrong, you're there and you hear it without freaking. You don't freak out.
No.
Like when I spilled water on my computer, I expected you to go, "What the fuck is wrong with you, dude?" And you were just like, "Okay, let's wait a second." The computer sometimes they don't break when water gets spilled on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like you're like, I've seen these things come back to life. Don't freak out yet.
I have.
So I know that I can count on you for that stuff, right. Which is great. But
because I know I did surprise you about the computer thing because I didn't panic. I was like, okay, so tell me what happened. Okay, so you go in the computer. Like I was trying to get the details of it because I don't believe that something's dead until it's proven dead. That's what it is.
Yeah, and I was freaking out, so it's good that you didn't match my emotional level. But so what happened with that was I was like, you were talking to me, and you were saying, you have to talk to him, and you told me the reasons why, and you had me look, and I was like, shit, I'm gonna go right now and call him right now because.
Well, yeah, and I said, do you have his number? You're like, yeah, I have his number, and I was actually surprised that you had his number. I didn't know you did. And
I had his number because at one point, David was talking to him about, if he ever wants to sell the houses, he'd be interested in buying them from him.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah, because he was like, this guy's an older gentleman, and maybe he wants to be done with this crap. And David's always been interested in having a rental property, so it would be convenient if it was right next door to our house. So,
Yeah.
So anyway, I had the number in my phone, and I called him.
And do you remember the approach we discussed to calling him?
um, yeah. I think you suggested to me that I just be honest and tell him that I know what went down with the dog.
Well, actually, it was more than that.
Okay, tell me more.
Well, because
I remember.
you know the guy has animosity towards you, right?
Oh yeah.
So the first
So
thing you have to do is you have to slice through the animosity because he's never going to be able to hear you if you don't.
right. So
Correct?
that's what I did. I called him and I said, "Look, I know that you and my husband had a run-in over the mulch," and he goes, "Yes, we did." And I was like, "And so I know that you're trying to get back at us by calling our dog." And he's like, "Yes, I was." And I said, "Okay, well, I apologize for that mulch situation. I know I'm not my husband, but I don't want us to have animosity towards each other." And then he went in on this whole thing. Well, wait, 4 years ago when you wanted to trim a tree that was on my property but leaning into yours, I said it was okay, and this is the thanks I get, and he had this whole story that he made up. And
Well, no,
while he was
but you gotta hear that though. He had a long list of grievances against you that you weren't even aware of.
right, so he was the same thing, no communication. And it's funny, yeah, I felt like this isn't a conversation I haven't heard before. Like this is a common. All of a sudden, it seemed like he could be somebody that I know, not my neighbor. He could be a family member. He could seem like
Yep.
you know this is common. So he starts saying this. I'm like, we really appreciate you being able to do that because or let us cut the tree because then we were able to grow our garden and we had more sun. And so we appreciate that. And I apologize for not being more appreciative about that. And, we'll make sure that mulch gets delivered and doesn't go on your yard again. And I don't want us to be, the world is with all the crap. I said this with all the crap that goes on in the world. One thing that we can be responsible for is not create animosity between each other as neighbors, and I don't want that. I want my neighborhood to be friendly and communicative, and if there's I want to make this right. So I just want to apologize. I don't want us to be at each other's throats. I don't think the world needs more of that. And he heard that and he said, I don't either. And he said, as a landlord, I would like it if, you could keep an eye on my properties because I never know when someone's going to have a naked orgy in my house. He literally said that.
A naked orgy?
Yeah,
Nice.
and he said if that happens, I'd like you to call me and let me know. And I'm like, okay, I will. And we chatted for a minute, and he's like, okay, and then that was it. And then when I went home, I said, David, you need to call him. And he's like, I don't want to. And I'm like, you're gonna call him.
Mhm. Yep.
And he did. He did, and he made amends with him too. And
Oh, good. I
I,
didn't know that.
yeah, he did because I was like, you have to, dude.
Yep. You can't go around in the world like that. You can't look, I mean, you can, but all you're doing is creating problems for yourself. You just got to get
Mhm.
like being right is not going to make your world right.
Yep.
So I'm really glad to hear that he called him. That's great.
So after that, it was like, wow, I realized so much more can happen in conversation. So because of this problem, he was he was doing all kinds of things which I found out about later. He was mad at us for a while.
He was
And he
mad
came
because
over.
of you.
Yeah, so he came over, he saw that we had a dumpster. I wasn't aware that I needed a permit for the dumpster, so he called and in the conversation he told me, "Look, I called and I told on you about your dumpster." I'm like, "Okay." But then he goes, "Here's the number for the woman." He admits to me that he told on me, and then he said, "Here's the number for the woman I called in the city of Raleigh, and why don't you call her and tell her that we talked and everything's okay?" And you know,
Oh, wow.
yeah. So, and then I later got a warning for having my garbage cans on the street because everything was a mess, because things were under construction. Now it's back to normal, but he really wanted to get us in trouble for as many things as possible. So I was really glad that I worked things out because otherwise this would be continuing.
And that's the whole thing and you have to realize this all got instigated by the dog, the animal control coming over, and then you suddenly discovering that there was this
Problem.
problem that you didn't know was there. And what I think is so interesting about it, and this is for everybody who's listening, you can either You can either pretend the problem isn't there and hope it goes away, or you can deal with the problem head on and make it go away yourself.
Exactly.
Those are the choices. And in one conversation, you made the entire problem disappear. And then, of course, you had your husband call, and he further reinforced the disappearance of the problem. This is, if there's anything that you want to take from this, it's that you can make any problem disappear, but you can't do it unless you talk to people.
Yeah, you have to talk to people. Exactly. And so one more little snippet to the story.
Yeah.
I looked up the dumpster permit thing. I applied online. I sent it in. I got an email that was kind of unclear about whether or not it was approved. And I was going to email back. And I decided, oh, there's a cell phone number here. I'm just going to call it. And the guy answered, and I said, hey, I'm dealing with this thing. The neighbor got mad. I didn't know I had to have a permit. I have this dumpster. Da, da, da. I told him the whole story, and he's like, "Oh, I get it. It's not clear that you have to have a permit. It's not part of the regular permits for construction. And here, I'll post date it for you. So, it looks like you have a permit since last week or whatever, and we'll get it taken care of. And it was free, which is weird,
Oh, really?
but." Yeah, I don't understand why, this red tape with stuff like that. But it was interesting. I took care of it quicker because I called instead of
Yeah.
emailing back and going, I don't understand this email or whatever,
And that's the problem too, is that there can be so much communication, or I should say miscommunication in email. People read into it, they read tone into it. How many times have you read an email and read tone into it that wasn't there?
Right. Or texts. Yeah.
Or text, same thing. And this is what people avoid. And by the way, the creative process, the actual, creating a career, and I do this in my self-employed career today. So much of what I do has to be done in conversation, because if I'm going to create it, part of it there's pieces of it that can get created in emails and occasionally a text or two. But where it really gets created is in conversation. Anything that I want to do has to happen in conversation.
Yeah. And you've said that about sales.
Oh, 100%. I mean, it's, sales is basically my life. And, I can't tell you how many times I've had to, in my entrepreneurial life, I've had to call and have a conversation with somebody about paying a bill at a certain time. Hey, I'm not going to be paying that on time. Here's what I can do. This is the amount I can pay. I can't tell you how many phone calls like that I've had. I can't tell you how many. I mean, they're too numerous to count in the, so many years that I've been self-employed.
Right.
Roller coaster, And yet there's probably people who think to themselves, I have to pay my, electric bill on time and there's no other choices. Actually, no, that's not true.
Right. I remember when I was telling you about all the financial problems I had in Virginia Symphony and how, I was paying this huge payment to a credit card that had gone, to collections. And you were like, whoa,
Yeah.
why'd you agree to that? And I'm like, I felt cornered by these people who were calling me all the time.
Yeah, no.
Nobody. And so I ended up paying like a majority of my income to this credit card. I mean,
yeah, forget it. Yeah, no. And if you had me around at that time, I'd have been like, here, give me the phone.
I know.
I'll take care of it, because there's no way, because I'm not going to make a bigger payment to a credit card than I'm going to make sure that my, electricity stays on.
I mean, I lived on grilled cheese sandwiches for a year so that I could afford to pay this stupid credit card.
Yeah. And people do that all the time, and I think it's ridiculous. I honest to God think it's ridiculous. There's no reason to suffer like that, because let me tell you something. They're going to have a Merry Christmas every year, whether you're sending them $500 a month or not.
Yep.
That's what you got to remember, is that they're going to be fine. You have to make sure you're fine before they're fine. True story. So yes. It's interesting, like the whole conversation thing and negotiating and enrolling, and there's selling, all these things are related. All these things are related. And it's very much about it's very much in the realm of creating whatever it is you want to do. And because things are not ready made for you, and human beings are involved.
Yes.
And where there are humans, there will be problems.
And we manage to screw things up even more when we don't talk. Like, look at this situation.
Yep.
What if at the moment that the mulch was a problem, instead of, even if the tiff, tiff, even if the tit would have happened,
right?
even if that really happened, maybe at that moment we could have said, "Hey, listen, let's not fight about the mulch. Hey, you want some of this mulch? We got a lot. You want some for around your tree? Let's share it and let's move it and let's not scream at
Right.
each other
And
about it."
I'm going
Good.
to tell you, if the mulch was, and I don't care what I thought about that guy or that guy's properties. If I had mulch that was sitting in a place he didn't want it, I would have said, you know what? I'm sorry about that. I'll move that. That's what I would have said.
I know. I don't know.
I
I
wouldn't have
think
gotten into an
because
argument with him about it. I wouldn't have gotten all righteous and shitty with him. I wouldn't have done that.
I know. I mean, technically, he's right, but because of the way he came at David just decided to go on the defensive instead of just solve the problem immediately right there and then.
Right. But I mean, and you guys know that the guy's kind of abrasive, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it sounds to
yeah.
me like this guy's had a little bit of a rough life.
I don't know much about his life, but
Yeah,
that's what he
but
seemed.
let me tell you something. You know about somebody's life by how they are.
Yeah,
Does that make sense to you?
yeah,
You don't need to know about any. You don't need to know any detail about somebody's life to know what their life has been.
hmm
Their behavior tells you everything. The way they speak, the way they act, their demeanor. It tells you everything. Somebody who speaks the way he spoke, something went wrong in his life. Probably a lot of things, right?
right. And this is funny because I'm thinking about like how David chose to meet him at the energy he was bringing to him, right?
Correct.
And I just had another conversation with somebody, and I won't give all the context because it's as far as who they were,
Mm-hmm.
but we were talking about a work situation where the person in charge was losing control of his emotions and getting in people's faces, and we were talking about how different people in that situation were reacting to it.
Mm-hmm.
And this person I was talking to said, "Well, when that happened to me, I didn't go to the emotional level of the person. I didn't either I didn't react, like I didn't cower away from him, or I didn't freak out. I just stayed calm and waited for that emotional tirade to be over. And then I dealt with what was there, and then it was over." And he said, the person I was talking to said, "And then that never happened to me again while I was working there." But with other people who didn't react in that way, they kept getting it. They kept getting the brunt of those kind of tirades.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting when you can try not to meet people at their out of control state by also equally losing control as well.
Or there's another way of handling that, which is because that does work, but there's another way that works well too, which is, let's say I've seen other people, I've seen people do this, like people who are really good at communication do this in a training situation. So like where you're getting trained to communicate.
Uh-huh.
I've been a part of a lot of those kind of trainings, and um, you know I'm trying to think of a situation like a situation where, let's say, um, let's say you walk into a coffee shop and they ran out of espresso. Actually, this has happened before. I went to a Starbucks one time and something happened. I don't think they ran out of espresso, but I think the espresso machine stopped working,
Okay.
which you can imagine at Starbucks is a big deal
Yeah.
because pretty much everybody orders an espresso drink, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And so and I order Americano, so it was a big deal for me too. But I remember, I was thinking about, and I saw this guy. There was a guy who walked in, and he was ahead of me, and I hadn't heard yet that the espresso machine was out. But the girl said to the guy, "I'm really sorry, sir. Our espresso machine just broke down about 10 minutes ago." And he got really upset. "You got to be kidding me!" And of course, it's in the morning, and he wants his caffeine. Can you blame him? He's upset. Whatever. But it was really great too, because the guy behind him goes, "I know, right? Can you believe that they wouldn't have espresso? But you know what? They've got this. Have you tried this Via stuff?" And the guy's like, "No, no." And of course, he's upset. But the guy's like meeting him where he is. He's like, "I know. Can you believe it? Starbucks running it, like their espresso machine doesn't work. But you know what? Have you tried this Via stuff over here?" Like, I knew what this guy was doing. He was totally trying to like calm the situation.
Yes, and that could have worked for the mulch. We could have been like, oh, that would piss me off too. I didn't even realize it was over on your
I
property.
know,
Sorry.
right? Can you believe that they just left it there? That's so annoying. That is so annoying. Like if you just
Yeah.
agree with them, but then you
Yeah.
take it and then you take him down. And this is what this guy did. He took him down. He goes, "But you know what? Have you tried this Via? Have you tried this Via stuff?" And the guy's like, and of course the guy's still flustered, right? And he's like, "Well, no, I haven't tried it. I mean, I like espresso." And he's like, "Yeah, I know, but you know what? You might want to try this because this is actually pretty good. Like this is." He's like, if you get the dark roast, it's actually really close to the espresso, and maybe you can use two. If you do, and the guy's like, do you do a lot of shots in your thing? He's like, yeah, I do like 6 shots. He's like, okay, well, what I would do is I would buy this, and I would have him put like three of them, because the guy doesn't, and the whole thing was the guy doesn't like the Starbucks coffee. He doesn't, and actually, I don't either. Starbucks coffee is kind of a burn flavor. They burn their
Oh,
beans.
the drip. Right. So he didn't want regular
So he didn't
coffee.
want regular coffee. And so the guy's like, well, listen, try this. And he's like, you should use three. Like I would use three of these since you like it really strong. And so he's like making recommendations. The girl at the cashier I mean, she was watching in awe of this whole thing. I mean, really, this guy was just masterful at and he completely diffused the situation. And the guy bought a package of Via. They prepared the drink. He tried it. He really liked it. They shook hands. The two guys, they shook hands. And he's like, hey, listen, I know it's kind of a shitty morning for you, but, I hope you have a great day. The guy's like, well, thanks a lot. I really,
Whoa.
it was really something. It was really, I mean, it was one of the most masterful situations of communication I've ever seen.
Did you talk to the guy afterwards, the one who calmed him down?
The guy he was two people in front of me, and I said that was friggin' brilliant. And that's what I said. I said that was friggin' brilliant. And the guy turned around and he kind of winked at me and he goes, sometimes you just gotta fix it.
That's great because
That's
I
what
could, yeah, that's awesome because I could see a situation where other people in line would be like, dude, chill the fuck out,
Yeah, that's the problem. I mean, like everybody was like, "What's he getting all upset about?" And I'm like, "Well, sometimes you have an expectation and it doesn't get met, and then and look, this happens all the time, and you're going to have human beings. This is going to happen to you. This is going to happen to you in every single thing you do. You have to learn how to diffuse situations, confront, deal, like all the things that you've had to deal with over the last year. That honestly, when you and I met, I think you would have probably run screaming from the room.
when.
Over some of these situations. I mean, I can
Oh,
honestly say when you and I first started talking again back in, I think it was March or February of last year, I think that like me telling you at that time to call the neighbor and talk to him about the animosity, you would have been like, "Are you out of your mind?"
Right. That's true if you would have told me back then.
You would have
I've
said
had
no.
I've had to
You would have
confront.
said no.
Yeah, this year I've confronted my fear of confront. That's the
Yes.
biggest thing I've done.
Yes. I agree. I agree.
There was a lot of situations with the construction and all kinds of things, and it was hard. It was
Yeah.
hard to
Yeah.
do because, just certain ways of living, you can avoid it for a really long time. And if you don't do it,
Yep.
then it will never get done. And the longer you don't do it, the more scary it seems.
Yep. It's true. And the
But I
truth is, human beings really are not that scary. I think we make them scary, and they're not.
yeah.
I really do. I think we make them a lot scarier than they really are.
The guy seemed so I was like, hell no, do I want to call him? And then after I called him, I was like, wow,
Yeah,
that was
didn't you say he's kind of like my grandpa or my dad, or didn't you say that?
yeah, he reminded me of my dad,
Yeah, right? Because your dad's kind of what's the word?
short fused.
Yeah. He's got like a he's real opinionated.
Yeah.
He's kind of stuck in his mind about certain things, right? Which
Yeah, and he reminded that when I was talking to the neighbor, and what I've seen in my dad as well is that if someone comes to him, with a white flag waving about
Mhm.
something,
Mhm.
he's ready to listen.
Yeah.
And that's what happened with this guy. He wasn't he didn't want to stay mad at me either.
No. No, and that's the truth is actually most human beings don't want to stay mad at you. They actually don't want to, and then there are some that do.
Right.
I mean, I still there are still relationships from my past where those people are still angry, those are people who are like, they're angry waiting to happen.
Yeah, and that happened to me at another point a few months ago when I had a confrontation situation,
Yep.
and I made the phone call, and it didn't end the way that I would had hoped. He ended up hanging up on me.
That's right. And
Remember?
yes, I do remember. And to this day, I promise you that he's decided something about you, like he doesn't like you, or he thinks you're rude, or like. And listen, you can't do anything about that.
Can't. I know.
You
But
know,
I'm still
and
glad I
I know
called
you're not
because I
worried
said
about
what I needed to say.
right, and I know you're not worried about it, but I think it's important to point out that you're not going to be able to fix everything all the time.
Right. Exactly.
Like, look, there's just some people who are just going to hate you because that's how they go through life.
Right.
You know, and I've had to learn to accept that too, because I like peace. I don't. It's not that I don't avoid confrontation. I actually enjoy confrontation, and I'm willing to confront. But I do it because I want to. I want to get complete. I want things to be complete. But listen, there are times when I attempt to get things complete, and they just don't get complete.
Right.
Like no matter what I say, no matter what my intention is, no matter how hard I work, whatever I say about it, it doesn't necessarily get complete. And I think that's what's so interesting about it. Is I think what's really cool about you is, over the last year, what I've seen you become okay with is, well, it's not necessarily all going to just be peachy, and everyone's not necessarily going to be singing Kumbaya. It's not necessarily going to be that way.
Right.
And you've gotten okay with that.
Yeah, I have. And it's funny because I called you right after I got hung up on. And I said, look, it didn't happen the way I thought it would. And
I know, and I remember you were kind of upset, weren't you?
a little. I was a little fired up because I was surprised he hung up on me, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the conversation didn't start that way. That I knew, I wasn't. I brought up something, and the guy didn't want to talk about it again.
Totally.
So he hung up on me. And but I at least got to say what I wanted to say. And so that's what you asked me. You said, "Did you talk about what you wanted to talk about, and did you give your piece?" And I said, "Yeah."
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, "Well, then you did it.
Yep.
Now you can decide if you're complete about it." And honestly, I hadn't thought about it again until just now.
Yeah. There you go. And that's how you know you're complete, because if you're not thinking about it, you're complete about it. If
Right.
you're still talking about it and thinking about it, then you're incomplete about it. There's something you have to get complete.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, some things you'll have to get complete on your own. You will not be able to do it with the other person. It's just what it is.
Right. So there's 3 different ways.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually getting complete with both parties, or one party, or none.
Or none, and you're just yourself.
Uh-huh.
And
that's when you just decide. You just say, am I complete about this?
Yep.
Yes or no. If not, you can maybe talk about it with a friend or think about it some more.
Yeah, you got to figure
or
it
whatever.
out. Exactly, but you certainly don't have to carry it.
Right.
And I think that's what people are doing too much of, is carrying.
Mm-hmm.
Or letting situations sort of fester and then not dealing with them.
Yeah.
Which is
that's
really
this is such a great conversation I think we could even branch this off into other human relations kind of situations that we could talk about, on these chats.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, because part of creation is understanding that humans are going to be involved. If you and you may be listening to this chat going, well, what does this have to do with my music career? Let me tell you something. It has everything to do with your music career. Because what's between you and the career you want is human beings. Make no mistake about it.
Yep.
If you think that you can create a career without human beings, you're out of your mind. Your head is in the sand. You are drinking. That is not happening. What's between you and everything you want is human beings, and your ability to communicate with them, to confront them, to deal with the issues with them. That is what's between you and everything you want.
Absolutely. And I can give so many examples of people that I know and people that I don't know personally, but that I know of in the music world, who are creating a career, and maybe they're not the best player in the world, but they've created relationships, they've created strong communities or whatever, and they're thriving because of that. And then that's right there, the example.
100%.
Yeah, we could talk about those individuals too, or just, come up with, this is a great conversation. And I'd like to talk more about it, because I think it's something that, like I mentioned before in a post, that musicians really do tend to be introverted. And that doesn't mean you can't talk and communicate,
Mhm.
but that I think sometimes people think that it does mean that way.
Well, and I also think that, so much of, and I remember being a musician, and so much of my life was spent in a practice room by myself, just with my instrument. Um, there's interpersonal skills that have to be developed. It's not just you and your instrument that creates a career. It's you, your instrument, and other human beings that create a career. That's what I think, this conversation is about, is that it's not enough. You and your instrument is not enough. And I know that's what the conversation has been in classical music for a long time. Me and my instrument and how good I am. Actually, no. Nowadays, it's you, your instrument, and other human beings, and audience, and messaging, and, you know, selling yourself, and promotion, and all the other things that go along with it. There's so much more to a music career now than there ever was before.
Yes. This is such a big conversation to have.
Yeah. So anyway, but we can wrap it, and I'm sure that there will be other topics that come up on future firesides. But I think this was I think you had some really good stories to bring in about, dealing with humans, because it's a requirement. If there's anything that you want in your life, it's going to require you and humans. It's just no two ways about it.
Absolutely. I love it. All right. Well, thanks, Eileen. And if you are enjoying Crushing Classical, please write a review on iTunes and join the conversation on social media. We're at facebook.com/Crushing Classical, Instagram at Crushing Classical, and I've been tweeting some, so I'm at Crush Classical on Twitter, getting used to Twitter. And I look forward to hearing from you, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.